forest is actually maximizing the exploitation of wood. That's all there is. And when there is a new sort of, when Mordecai goes on a new kind of a commodity, yeah, that suddenly becomes valuable, then they could go the sustainable way. This means they could start managing it in a way that it regrows and they can forever sort of harvest it on a certain level. But usually what they do is they try to take as much as possible, destroy the rossz, and go on to the next one. And I think, that's a situation, what I'm afraid is the attitude towards forests right now from wide parts of the industry. And it's absolutely true that you say, in terms of GDP, it's like 0.7%. And there is this thing that we discussed with the ecosystem services. And the ecosystem services is an enormously technical, abstract term that outside a few people nobody really understands. Try to say to a normal person ecosystem services. We got a whole list of things going down, but the normal person actually does not. But I think the situation, and it was for us quite impossible to explain that, but I think that situation is changing because what we see is we see an overall degradation of ecosystems. I think that only 3% of the ecosystems are considered as functionally intact. So that means that ecosystems are losing the buffering capacity. As long as you got the buffering capacity, you don't notice that something is sort of getting less and less. But you come to a certain point and the buffering capacity is gone and the ecosystem service starts to fail. And essentially, that produces an increased bill on the kitchen table of normal people. If, for example, natural forests work like a sponge for water, yeah? So that means if you got a drought, they can release water, or if there is a flood, they can absorb more water. Natural rivers, for example, have retention areas, they can sort of store water and all of that. If you take all of that away, you increase the incidence of floods. If you have incidence of floods, not only sort of a lot of people affected whose houses are flooded, everybody's insurance rate goes up. And I think, we need to find ways of translating what we are talking about to the level of the bill on the kitchen table. And I think this is the kind of counterweight that we need in order to deal with a kind of a political system that's completely transactional and performance-oriented nowadays. And a lobby, you said, the agriculture and the forest lobby, there are only so few, but quite frankly, when I started working on that, I was really amazed how powerful they are. And the reason why they are so powerful is because they are vertically and horizontally integrated. And they are rooted in the local system and they can operate on the EU level. It's different from the oil industry, for example. The oil industry are nodes, yeah? But the forest and the agriculture thing is just like a bank. That's a river. Okay, that was just what I wanted to say. I think we really got the challenge, and what we need for that is what you said before. We need to go down into data, and we need to sort of really pin down what the value of ecosystem services is. In this report that you mentioned, that I think we should send around, they say that the ecosystem services of forests in Europe are worth 100 billion, and the forest industry revenue is 16 billion. So basically the 16 billion dominate the entire forest system, which is worth much, much, much more.
So I think that the presentations, early presentations by Professor Early and Eichhardt gave a very good overview of where the win-win is in the coalition. But I could mention there are losers, specifically in terms of like the low-value wood-producing industries, like the paper and pulp industries, who certainly in the context now, I think, of the sort of the competitiveness agenda that's dominating EU discourse at the moment, might feel like, because they will have to now compete in the market in your envisioned scenario where the costs are internalized for them and higher, and the costs are externalized from other like non-EU actors, for instance, that will push them to either lobby against it, or there might need to be some type of PES design that could like include them as well in terms of revenue sharing. So how do we, either through design of PES or through lobbying efforts, ensure that this 16 billion that is predominantly these type of like low-value industries won't end up dominating the discourse, especially within this like overarching concern of EU competitiveness.
What were the two sectors you said again? The low.
So I would imagine paper and pulp would be like large.
Where there is a genuine productive use, nobody's talking about curtailing that use. We've been hearing for the second set of presentations this morning about forest bioenergy. There is zero productive use from that. For the simple reason that emissions from forest bioenergy are higher than the coal that it's meant to replace, and considerably higher than the gas. So that needs to be wiped out anyway, because it's just a complete nonsense. The small wood producer is still going to have a future. And we're just about to produce a report on commercial scale bioenergy, literally in 2 weeks' time, by Trinomics, who are the main advisors to the Commission on Energy. And we're leaving domestic consumption out of this at the moment because it's a political hot potato. You've got the whole food, fuel poverty agenda, etc. Let's go for the low-hanging fruit and what we can actually achieve in lobbying terms, and we can move on to that. And it's as much about the health agenda anyway, if you're talking about domestic heating using wood. And that's frightening enough for people, frankly, and probably would deal with a lot of the problem on its own. As for the low-value wood producers, that I think caters for them. Most other people, frankly, can retrain and change industry. In economic terms, really what we're talking about here, by activating the PES, the FES agenda, is going to create an awful lot more rural employment than what it's replacing. If you think about it, most of which is contract labour, a lot of which doesn't, when you're talking clear felling, even come from the area that you're looking at. We do a lot of work in Fagrash, for example, that we were talking about earlier. A lot of those areas that were being logged of old growth have now been bought or taken out of commission generally. One of the replacements for that is 50,000 tonnes a year of carbon credits. Value that on an extra basis at somewhere between 70 and 100 euro per tonne, and you've got an awful lot of money, most of which is already finding itself back into the local community for all the sort of positions that you can create from that agenda.
Just a short comment to what Toby said. Bioenergy is the worst use of wood, but pulp and paper is almost as bad. It's also a short-lived product. It also goes to the atmosphere very fast. And it's also something that we can avoid easily, especially that most of the pulp that is produced in Europe or imported to Europe is used for packaging. It has been a growing problem.
Yeah.
So I just don't want to leave us with an impression that a lot of paper is a good use of wood. No, let it stay in the ecosystem, not for disposable packaging.
Yeah. But it is at least useful, even though a lot of it's unnecessary, it is fulfilling a requirement. Forest bioenergy is doing exactly the opposite. We're paying an enormous amount of money to make the climate worse and actually undermine the economy in the process. It's unbelievable. It's Alice in Wonderland on steroids.
We have talked about policy in general terms and seen the time series. And the question is, what was the original sin that led to this massive growth in burning wood? And if it would be to pinpoint, I would see it was a green-derived policy error. So if we are sincere, the first RED directive was driven at least partially by NGOs. So the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and we are on the road to hell. So this is a warning sign when we are doing any kind of lobbying. We should look at the ethical downstream consequences, because as you mentioned, if industry sees a new commodity, wood, we can burn that commodity, it's good. So they are doing this because of the regulation in the EU currently, and we cannot wipe it out because it has a big monetary incentive behind it, and also corruption and lobbying and everything else. So the initial question is, if we would do an ethical lobbying, because we are currently working with developing this sustainable business for conservation, forestry, also in Romania, with Austrian partners, looking for some plots also in Hungary, based on fully market funding, so without any kind of social funding, and it's working in a small scale. But we would like to scale it up fast, so we can help everyone. But we don't know where are the levers in the lobbying system, so we can show that the smartphone is coming and the old industry, the Nokia, is going to die. Either way. So we are trying to build an Apple for the forest management industry for the future. But all the players in the system and also the owners with co-ownership are looking like, You don't say you will have a phone without buttons, so it doesn't make any sense, but it will come. So if you can help us in any way, if we can put our inputs, which are already proven economic terms working, also in Romania, a lot of plots, I think it's about 1,000 hectares and it's growing fast. But we need more wind, so we can put it to other countries. We still have old growth forests and go there first and save those forests because these are the priority, and then we can move on to secondary forests and see where it goes. Thank you.
I would be actually interested to hear some, because I was looking into this biodiversity credit market. And you see, the problem is, if you are an investor, yeah, and the problem that the market itself has, that nobody really right now is investing in it, because they don't see where the revenue stream would come out of it. Yeah? And that's different from the carbon market. In the biodiversity market, actually, the ones who want to increase biodiversity want to actually do it in perpetuity. So this means not on a 20-year or on a 30-year. You want to really sort of restabilize the ecosystem. Yeah? But how do you get your money out of that? That's why, for example, a lot of those initiatives have then in the end turned to become philanthropic again, or they work with bonds, like Bison bonds, where they actually are looking at the US government to provide the incentive because they want to fund sort of tribal lands and all of that. But the private investors so far have not seen that that works because it's unclear that they would get their investment back plus interest. Yeah?
I'm trying to take a little bit of distance from this block with our presentations and also the discussion. And I'm a little bit surprised that we are putting so much hope and emphasis on payment for ecosystem services without saying that most of nature we shouldn't pay for. Everybody who owns a piece of nature should take care of it and should be obliged by law to take care of it. I don't want to, actually I find it unfair that I have to pay for clear water. Because clear water is there and then there are people who pollute it. If I also pollute it, then I have to pay for it, but I don't have to pay the polluter for not polluting the water. I think this is completely wrong concept of payment for ecosystem services. So I would be interested and ask my colleagues here, where is the fine line between legal restrictions of land use preventing degradation of ecosystem services and the creation of markets for payment for ecosystem services?
I began by saying there's a huge funding gap. The first principle, and I completely agree with you, this is the moral obligation to fund ecosystems. There's just no doubt about that at all. And there needs to be a legal underwrite to that, unfortunately, because you can't rely on everybody's moral probity. So that's fine, I think we're completely one. What I'm saying is that still leaves a massive gap of up to 50% of the requirement in the very short run. And it's no use relying on something, however ethically right it might be, if it simply isn't working at the end of the day. You've got to bring everything you can to bear, because we're really facing a very urgent position. One thing we've seen more than anything else today is the speed and the comprehensiveness with which these incredibly precious, irreplaceable natural assets are being destroyed as we speak here. How many hundreds of hectares have been literally erased since we started this morning? So I think we need to use everything we can, but I totally agree with you, there is a balance, and it's got to be considered the whole way through.
Can I just
One second. It's just one correction. I don't think, well, not correction, but my standpoint is, I don't think it's only a moral obligation. I think it's a matter of good legislation. To have environmental laws that make people who own land keep it in a good state.
I agree.
Yeah?
Yeah, I agree.
So it's not only moral.
People are not moral by action, so you need the law to back your morality. That's really what I was trying to say. Yes, I think we agree totally, actually.
Okay.
I also very much like your model of forestry. I'd love to discuss it.
Just want to add something. which I think that pests can also contribute to smallholders. So, for instance, I was bringing the example of shepherds, which is an activity that is being lost and otherwise would not survive. So it's also a way to support some traditional activities that don't have so much economic future, as well as maybe some more sustainable, I don't know if we are allowed to use this word, but sustainable agricultural practices or sustainable forest practices. So I think it can also, it doesn't have necessarily to do with the most polluting practices, and it can also be related to, this kind of